All right, let's get started. So once more, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, depending on where you are. Thank you for joining us today to our webinar, Social Synergy, Shaping Up the S in ESG. We've had a lot of interest in the session today, and I think the numbers are starting to level off, so we can get to the session today. My name is Sarah Coughlin. I am Associate Director for Social Wellbeing here at EVORA Global. And I'm delighted today to be hosting the webinar jointly with Grace from the Centre of Active Design. Grace, would you mind introducing yourself to everyone, please?
Yeah, hi, Sarah. Thank you so much for having me on today. My name is Grace Dickinson. I'm the Associate Director of Applied Research at the Center for Active Design. For those who aren't familiar, we are the nonprofit supporting the Fitwel building certification you all may be more familiar with. So I've been at CFAD for 3 years, and my background work and research is in urban planning and public health.
Yes, the real brains of the operation today. I'm just here for pressing buttons. As we've mentioned, this is a joint webinar between EVORA and the Centre for Active Design, who look after the Fitwel standard. Many of you on the phone likely know EVORA, but for those of you that don't, we are ESG advisors to the real asset industry. We look after some of the largest real asset investors and managers in the world. I'm talking to you today from Germany. I'm part of the German team. We are headquartered over in London with offices in the north of England as well. We have an Italian team, a Romanian team, and now a burgeoning US team. So we really are a global entity. At EVORA, we pride ourselves on what we call our collaborative expertise. There are many parts of a successful ESG strategy for any kind of real estate business. We have strategic consultancy, which supports in the development of long-term strategies, thinking through some of the knottier issues in ESG, social well-being among them. We have an advisory business, which supports on reporting against all of the main standards. For anybody on the phone that hasn't thought about GRESB yet this year, I'm here to say GRESB, our advisory team look after that. And we are, of course, also a technology business. Our proprietary software, Sierra, is a tech solution for real estate reporting with a strong focus on high-quality data. If you've not seen the press release, you will likely see it at some point while you're mooching through the industry news. Last week, EVORA acquired Metri, the leading European data collection for energy in real estate. So that has really strengthened the offer from a tech perspective. So in case you didn't know EVORA, that's us. I'm going to hand back to Grace to talk about Fitwel.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. So you can actually jump to the next slide. I'm going to give a little bit of a brief background or intro to Fitwel, just for the audience members that may not be familiar with us, to kind of ground you all in our background and work before we jump into certified metrics. So Fitwel started as a product of the Center for Disease Control, the CDC, and the General Services Administration in 2016. And then when it launched publicly in 2017, Center for Active Design became the license operator of Fitwel, although the CDC remains a key research partner of ours. So as a certification standard, Fitwel is backed by over 100 years of public health research and a library of over 7,000 peer-reviewed articles that we're very proud of and only continues to grow. So, and apart from maintaining the standard, CFAD also partners with global organizations to conduct original research and further establish the necessity for Fitwel. On the right, you can see a variety of our publications over the past few years. Next slide. You can jump to the next one, yeah.
You'll have to excuse my computer. It's argumentative.
Oh, no worries. Okay, so while Fitwel is a certification system for buildings and sites, the Fitwel mission goes beyond just certification, with really a vision for a healthier future where every building is enhanced to support the well-being of its occupants and surrounding communities. So our standard is unique in our focus on human health, not only the occupants, but also other impacted stakeholders, from project contractors to neighboring communities. The Fitwel standard is composed of a library of strategies that address human health, depending on the asset or site type, all of which have a substantiated impact on at least 2 of our 7 health impact categories. So those are impacting surrounding community health, reducing morbidity and absenteeism, supporting vulnerable populations, instilling feelings of well-being, enhancing access to healthy foods, promoting occupant safety, and increasing physical activity. So for those of you who already knew that, that's great. But for those who don't, I just kind of wanted to lay that foundation of our focus on health and being a data-driven company that's really focused on strategies and certifications for health in the real estate industry. Hopefully that will help kind of present why we decided to embark on this certified metrics endeavor. Next slide.
Marvelous. Thanks, Grace. So I'm going to get into, if you like, setting the stage for what we want to present today. For anybody that has been working in ESG in real estate and in the built environment, in Germany, in the UK, anywhere really, I think if we all put our hands on our hearts and told the truth, we would know that when we've been saying ESG up until really recently, we have meant E with a big capital and then S and G in really small sort of smaller letters. We have not taken it anything like as seriously as we have taken all things environmental. Now, as a social specialist, I acknowledge the role that environmental has played, and of course it's of crucial importance. We are living through a climate crisis, so you'll hear no argument from me that it was very important to be, first and foremost, it is at the front of the acronym. However, from a commercial perspective, things have started to shift. If you are a real estate investor with a focus on ESG, 10 years ago, you could be a market leader when you were talking about, your pathways to net zero. If you had a clear plan to, improve your EPCs, you could confidently talk about yourself as a market leader with doing things that we now consider business as usual. And as the market has matured, as environmental has become deeply embedded in business as usual across the industry, commercial attention has turned to the social component quite naturally. Now, of course, real estate at its roots is about people. We build buildings to serve people. But now that the focus has started to shift on the opportunities presented for a forward-thinking manager that is trying to position their fund in a really innovative space, social is starting to take center stage. The trouble that this presents, however, is that up until quite recently, social has been quite piecemeal. So there are lots of different standards, there are lots of different frameworks talking about how to address all things social. But none of them have been universal. And by that, I mean they've not been applicable to every geography and every type of building. So the needs for example, if you're building a hospital in the public sector is really, really different for the social needs associated with a logistics asset in, for example, Denmark. So the lack of consistency in the piecemeal coverage has meant that there's been quite a serious hesitation to be able to talk seriously about social. As we've seen with all things ESG, the success and failure of a good ESG strategy in the days where it just meant environmental really was really, really robust data. And social has struggled for a long time because there hasn't been a realistic benchmark. It's very difficult to say to your investor, we are doing something market leading without the data to back that up. And what I hear again and again from clients when I'm speaking to them is, what does good look like? Is what I am doing meaningfully better than my peers? Am I behind my peers? What is the market norm? And being unable to answer that question robustly and coherently has damaged the credibility of social up until recently. So it is difficult to differentiate between good and bad practices unless we've got those good foundations. The flip side of that is that the public sector has really taken the lead on all things social. Certainly, if you're in the UK, you'll have heard of the Social Value Act, and more recently, some of the UK government's social value criteria. And that has absolutely bled into the way that councils, particularly in the UK, are thinking about all things social, particularly from a planning point of view. And we are now starting to talk to councils and planning authorities about social license to operate. And by that, we mean it's not just about being able to demonstrate that you're kind of offsetting the disruption caused by a new development. It's also about building trust and putting money and resources back into the local economies that you are operating in. So it's kind of on both sides. Investors are looking for really good, strong benchmarks and the ability to be able to say what we are doing is market leading or it's behind where the market is in a coherent way. And we've got increasing focus from the planning authorities about building a really, really clear answer to the question about how development and the built environment is contributing to the communities that they that they operate in. So this is the challenge. This is the difficulty that we've been working through over the last 12 or 18 months while we've been working with the team at the Centre for Active Design and Fitwel. We've been trying to look for solutions to this specific problem. And I'm delighted today to be able to talk to you about the solution that we have found for that. It is certified metrics, which is the working title. Brains more creative than mine are working on a better brand for that at the moment. But as Grace will tell you in a moment, these are a global standard for social in real estate that addresses the pieces that I've been talking about there. Primarily, it is globally applicable and it works for all asset types. So I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to hand over to the boffin, and Grace is going to talk you through certified metrics.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so I'm going to give kind of a brief overview of what we've developed, how we got here, and our goals in this working title, Certified Metrics. How perfect. So as I spoke about earlier, given our established history of applying health to building and site design and operations, we felt well poised to address the piecemeal approach to social that Sarah mentioned earlier. So we began this process actually almost 2 years ago, beginning to take an economic lens to our well-established list of health strategies. So we began to explore research around the economic impacts associated with all of the strategies within our health library, ultimately developing a subset of Fitwel strategies that have the greatest impact on material risk and financial value into what we are temporarily calling the certified metrics product. So this is an entity-wide approach that will allow users to evaluate their entire portfolio or fund against a selection of 6 targeted outcomes that each contain those strategies we've selected. Next slide. Okay, so our goal really, as you can probably tell in the launch of Certified Metrics, is to greatly improve and set the standard really for S reporting. So users will be able to understand their performance against these targeted outcomes, which I'll preview in a moment, which contain qualified evidence-based metrics connected not only to improved health, which we know and hold with our evidence base, but also now financial materiality through this product. So these were developed after a close examination of existing reporting standards and frameworks to ensure that the data we were collecting in these strategies also aligned with what was needing to be reported elsewhere. Certified metrics will also allow users to centralize their data collection process and track their progress over time. And finally, as a product of the Fitwel standard, all of the strategies that are achieved through certified metrics will be third-party validated by our certification team and enable users to see their performance not only in relation to other certified metrics users, but also to all other certified Fitwel projects. So we know data validation will be a central piece of reporting moving forward. And as Sarah mentioned earlier as an issue, the relational data will help to set benchmarks for what is good, better, and best in terms of practice across the real estate industry. Next slide. So this will give kind of a brief overview of what the process looks like for users. For those of you familiar with Fitwel, in contrast to our 3-year certification cycle for full asset certification, the certified metrics product will be an annual recertification. So this decision was made due to kind of the annual nature of ESG reporting and reporting requirements. We wanted users to have up-to-date reporting data for their annual reporting. Users will start by defining their entity, so they can self-define which assets and asset types they want to include, define their fund structure and other aspects of their entity. They will then set goals, not only for which certified metrics outcomes they want to pursue, which you can select, but also for the percent of the entity they want to report on over time. They will also set their goals so they can track their achievement. And this feature isn't so much for us to place kind of a judgment, but rather for users to themselves to track their progress based on their internal reporting needs. Step 3 and 4, those really focus on the assessment, documentation, and submission process, where users will consider the applicability of the strategies within certified metrics, how they align with the needs of their entity and the assets within the entity, and then document their achievement for submission. As I mentioned, achievement will be assessed by our third-party trained certification team. And this is just a brief overview. New users will be guided through this process and receive more details as they participate. Next slide.
Doing it again, Grace. I'm so sorry.
No worries.
There we go. There we go.
Perfect. Okay. So instead of just kind of talking abstractly about these outcomes and these strategies, I wanted to give some context and content to this sub-selection of strategies we've selected for certified metrics. So as I mentioned, the product contains 6 targeted outcomes. So we landed on these by considering the goals of ESG reporting against the goals of our health and well-being approach in Fitwel. So these 6 goals are ones that we see as important in ESG reporting, in financial materiality, but also in terms of health and well-being. So they are optimizing assets for walking and transportation, enriching access to natural elements, the biophilic design, supporting high-quality environments, fostering climate resilience and preparedness, engaging with occupants and community stakeholders, and advancing equity. So each of those 6 outcomes contains those Fitwel strategies that have the strongest impact on both health and material value and risk. As we work with our health strategies, we also wanted to be really research and data-driven in assessing the material value that each of these strategies brings to reporting. So we based this assessment on the strategies impact in 5 different areas. So we looked at ROI, we looked at the strategy's impact of on-site costs, risk exposure, tenant satisfaction, and employee productivity. Insights like those that you'll see on the screen that substantiate the value proposition of the strategies, you'll see if you participate associated with each strategy included in the product. So this is kind of a brief preview of what users will see when they look at the strategies that are included in the comprehensive product. Next slide. Okay, so while our vision is that users will have their absolute and relative performance accessible year-round on the data platform, at the end of the reporting cycle, they will also receive a summary report. So these are screenshots from a sample report, but give a preview into the types of insights we want users to receive. The idea being that this summary report will have a comprehensive inclusion of the peer data set at the end of the year, but also provide narrative and quantitative data that can be pulled into their own reporting needs. So you'll see there are research insights connecting health to value, performance aggregated by asset type, and in comparison to peer performance at the targeted outcome, metric, and even individual strategy level. This is still only our first iteration of the report. We're currently wrapping up our pilot process and gathering feedback from the participants. So this will potentially evolve over time, but we're excited about what we have at this point. This has been an iterative process of ensuring that the product matches both the needs of users, which EVORA has been extremely helpful with, but also ensuring that this kind of holds its own against our back of research and making sure that it stays true to that research. So yeah, this is kind of a brief overview of the product, our cycle of getting here. what we envision it to be and the report that users will receive. Obviously, each piece of this could have been an hour-long presentation on its own, so it's only an overview. But I wanted to give a brief intro on everything, and I'll turn it back to Sarah as we head into a little bit of a Q&A.
Grace, thank you so much. That was so interesting. So I should say, it seems that the Q&A function is alive and well. So I would encourage anybody that's listening that has questions to just drop them in that chat, and we'll keep our eye on that and address them as we go. While you were talking, Grace, many questions struck me. So I think maybe I'll start with those, and then we can get into some of the more detailed questions. Grace, you talked about the pilot process that we've been going through with a handful of kind of early adopters. Can you talk a little bit more about what's been going on there?
Yes, so we recruited members of our leadership advisory board, which are participants that clients we work with regularly, to participate using assets they have certified under the Fitwel v2.1 standard. So we had them go through this kind of process that I outlined, to find their entity, choose which projects they wanted to be included in the process, and go through this documentation. And I think we gathered feedback from them along the way, trying to get a better sense for what this process is like in terms of the reporting, in terms of the questions we're asking. Are we asking the right questions in asking them how to define their entity, in terms of how much time it takes to report. And then we gathered feedback in developing this report itself. So is this the right data that you all will need? Is this presented in a way that's useful based on your other reporting needs? So this has been really a learning process for us, as well as for the users, to understand what we're building and how it can be useful to them.
Marvelous. And the expectation is that we're going to come back to the market with a new name at some point this year. That's right, isn't it?
Yes. So we're still having a select group of users pilot this process with us. And our goal is towards the end of 2024 to have something to share more publicly.
Marvelous. Now, you'll forgive me, as I said at the top of the webinar, you're the brains of the operation today. You said two things when we were talking about, let me just hop back to this slide if my computer will allow it. You said two things when we were talking on this slide that I think might be worth just spending a little bit more time exploring. The first was relational data. Could you maybe put in quite simple terms what we mean by relational data and why it's useful?
Yes. So as you mentioned, clients were coming to you asking, how do we know if what we're doing is good
It's
enough?
the biggest headache.
Exactly. So when clients, our vision for certified metrics is that users will receive not only their performance against the strategies within these outcomes, but they will also see how they're performing against their peers. So they'll see how all other Fitwel certified projects and certified metrics participants are performing in active living, how they're performing in walkability, and they'll see how they fall against their peers, not only comprehensively, but also unique to that asset type. There are certainly, as we've seen even in this pilot process, certain targeted outcomes and certain strategies that multifamily performs really high in, but other ones that commercial office performs really well in. So there are those kind of peer benchmarks that are unique to asset type, but also important to understand comprehensively. And we're hoping that by using this standard and pushing it to more and more users, that we'll get a better sense for what that good, better, and best looks like across the industry.
And that has been what's missing. And I think that's what's really, for me, this is what's most exciting about what we've got here, because Fitwel has been around for, forgive me, 15 years more, potentially. I don't tell Joanna that I don't know that information, the CEO. And over that time, you've certified thousands of buildings against the standards. So you've got this huge database already. That means that if you're certifying against the certified metrics, name TBC, you're getting all of that information, you're getting all of that context, and that's what's been missing, right?
Exactly. Yes. And that's also part of why we wanted to have this report come at the end of the reporting cycle, because every day we're getting new projects registered on the platform and constantly having new certifications. So that peer data set only continues to grow.
Yeah, and that I think is really what's been missing and what I'm personally most excited about. The second piece I wanted to pick up with you, Grace, is the economic component. Down here, we've got all sorts of exciting statistics. Investor dollar, say $4, $1 million per tenant, really great numbers. Can you maybe talk through a little bit about what exactly that we're saying here?
Yeah, so as I mentioned a bit earlier, we really pride ourselves on being data-driven, research-based company. And in the creation of certified metrics, this subset of Fitwel strategies that have the highest impact on value, we wanted to really stay true to that ethos. So really focusing on the data and what that really quantifying what that economic impact is. So obviously, as a given, every strategy that we considered for the product already had passed our screening criteria to be a Fitwel strategy, which you'll remember means it meaningfully impacts health. So these strategies really are already high impact KPIs in terms of human and community health. But to take it a step further, because obviously we already have our health focus, we want to add this additional data-driven layer of analysis to the strategies around economics. All of the strategies of certified metrics met a minimum threshold of economic impact in terms of both the quality and quantity of evidence, but also, and I think most importantly, the strength of impact, which is some of the numbers you're seeing on the screen. So the strength of impact was really a key part of this process for our research team, because we wanted all of the strategies included to have a clear place of inclusion for a conversation about materiality and reporting. So the economic impact of each strategy was assessed across 5 areas. So impact on return on investment, so thinking property value or lease rates, reduce risk, such as exposure to legal issues or physical climate risk, which is definitely something that has come up with that E of ESG. Impact on on-site costs, so such as insurance valuations or even energy costs, which we see a lot of those resiliency strategies addressing, and then impact on tenant satisfaction and employee productivity. So we really wanted every strategy to have a clear business case in addition to the health case if it was going to be relevant for us reporting. So that's kind of some insight as to the numbers you're seeing on there.
Thanks for that, Grace. And for the UK audience that might be familiar with social return on investment strategies, I think it's important to point out that what we're doing here is somewhat different from that approach. So a social return on investment or a cost benefit analysis that you might see in social value is really about a proxy value associated with an outcome. Here we're talking concretely about saving money on insurance premiums, right? Adding value to your building. It's a slightly different thing.
Yeah, exactly. And I am curious, I think one of the key pieces that has been really important in our partnership is us learning more about how this data we're pulling is really going to be used by the clients. So based on your expertise, I was wondering if you could share a little bit of how you anticipate this type of data and insights being used by the users.
Oh, I see. I have to answer questions now. I thought I'd got you cornered. No, it's a really good question. I mean, from my side, one of the things that I hear a lot from our clients is the need to justify any sort of spending on any sort of activity. The market is tight. There's not a lot of transactions going on. We're all aware that we're in a little bit of a down at the moment. So being able to talk concretely about being able to save money on premiums, being able to build a coherent business case based on doing good is a win-win from every side. It's easy to say we need a little bit of OpEx in order to be able to, sort out biophilic design. If we can say, and that is going to add to the building when we do eventually come up for sale, it's more difficult to say that where it's not been planned, it's not part of the strategy from the outset, as we're in these kind of hold periods at the moment. If it's not planned, it really needs a business case. And I think this is one of the things that really stands out for me on the certified metrics approach. We're able to talk about not only doing good things that are going to improve the experience for the people in the buildings and the people around the buildings, but also add value. So it supports on the bottom line too. I have got lots of questions for you, Grace, but I'm seeing quite a lot of questions in the chat. Thank you, everybody that is contributing to the Q&A about peer groups. So maybe if I swap over to the next slide, and we can just look at Have we got peer groups pulled out here? Yes, there's peer groups on here. The questions in the chat, Grace, are about how we're identifying peer groups and how we're grouping those together. Could you maybe talk to that piece, please?
Yeah, definitely. So we are aggregating the data by asset type, as you can hopefully kind of see in this sample report. We recognize that you don't want to really compare apples to oranges. There are some strategies that are only applicable in commercial office, some that are only applicable in residential. And as I kind of mentioned earlier, there are some areas where certain asset types just perform better across the board. And you want to really know how you're doing against your peers. That does mean a specific peer set of other of the same asset types. So you'll see here we've divided it by multifamily, residential, workplace. This sample report only has those. We also have within the Fitwel library community site scorecard, a commercial and industrial sites subset of peers. So I think it really goes back to asset type and use type. And I think that creates a scenario where you can get real peer data to know what you're comparing yourself to. We do provide data aggregated across the entity, across asset type, but we have found in our initial pilot process that the meaningful data comes by comparing to the same asset type. And so that's really what we have right now. And as I mentioned, as we continue to get more projects certified, we've seen a real surge in the past 6 months of conversations of health and well-being around commercial industrial. So we'll have a bigger data set for them as we get more projects on the platform, and it'll only continue to grow.
Lovely stuff. I wanted to ask you, Grace, about how we expect decisions on which KPIs that were included and what ended up not being included. So for those of you that don't know, the Fitwel standard has something like 150 strategies. How did you end up with the shorter list that we've been working with?
Yeah, so the Fitwel full strategy library, as you said, is about 150 strategies. And we recognize that in the reporting world, everyone already has a lot on their plate. It's not really realistic for us to come to market with something that is entirely overwhelming. And the other reality is that certain strategies have a higher impact on value than others. We know that all of the strategies within our library have a high impact on health. And through this process, and obviously through operating Fitwel for many years, we've begun to learn that there is a real business case for health. And some strategies, as I mentioned, we created this threshold. Some have a stronger impact on value than others. I think right now we wanted the list to be something that every strategy included, the value was clear and strength of impact was strong. I anticipate that as we gather more data and as the peer-reviewed data set grows, we may expand this list of strategies if more strategies have a robust evidence base that demands inclusion. But I think for now, we wanted to set the bar at really those strategies that have the strongest impact. So internally, we have a threshold set. We weight each strategy based on, as I mentioned, the quality of evidence, the quantity of the evidence, and the strength of impact. And we have an internal threshold for how a strategy kind of has to justify inclusion. But we do anticipate that this will grow over time.
Well, I'm going to ask you about what we can expect from version 2 in a moment. But maybe the next question is more of an existential one. I'm sure you're excited, Grace. I suppose my question is, why did you decide to go for this now, or 2 years ago now? What is it that's changed in the market to justify spending all this time and resource developing something like this for the market?
Yeah, that's a great question. So as you kind of touched upon earlier, we're kind of at a key inflection point where the E of ESG is well established, but there hasn't really been a standard for the S of social reported. And we felt kind of uniquely positioned to provide this and place health as a key piece of the conversation to measure the S. We have a well-established history of quantifying health for the real estate industry, and our expansive and growing Fitwel database of healthy buildings also provides a unique relative data set for users to benchmark their performance against. As we kind of touched on earlier, it really can help set the bar for this good, better, and best performance across the industry that we might already have for the E, but for the S has really been missing. We also anticipate that as reporting standards continue to kind of tighten their regulations around greenwashing and needing more validated data to say, okay, you can say what you're doing, but you need to show us what you're really doing. The expectation for third-party certified reporting is going to be more important than ever. So it kind of was a timing thing, but also a matter of looking at what we had in our tool belt and saying, I think this is a great opportunity for us to grow. We know the business case for health. We've learned it over time, and now we can really advertise it as such.
I mean, I completely agree with that, Grace. An old colleague of mine has got a term for greenwashing for social. He calls it sock washing. And I think that's such a good term, and I hope it catches on. But I think what's interesting is that we are starting to see some of the consequences for sock washing, if you like, starting to come through. So I know of examples of councils in the UK that have been using clawback clauses where they feel that their social commitments that they've been promised by the developer haven't been adequately met. So we are slowly starting to see, as you suggested, this inflection point whereby social moves from, and we've got a little sentence on social at the bottom of our ESG strategy, to something really serious and commercial. And I think that's going to grow over time, specifically because we are already at this reasonably mature place from an environmental perspective. Yeah, social, I think, is going to become useful as a competitive tool for organizations looking to position themselves, but also maintaining their ability, organizations' ability to break ground, to win planning, to kind of position themselves as a reliable partner for a community. Yeah, it won't stand up to sock washing.
Yeah. It's really interesting. We saw really from COVID, health go from kind of a nice to have to a really important issue. And we're starting to see that too with ESG reporting. You know, the social used to be kind of a footnote, and now more and more it's becoming something that investors want to understand the real impact there.
Yeah, and that actually, there's a nice question in the chat. Forgive me if I can't remember who asked it. It's an anonymous attendee, I'm not being rude. The question is, who are the target audience for this? Is it the investors? What's the role of this this product? Where do we see it?
Yeah, that's a great question. And honestly, that's been something that we've been learning through our pilot process, because we work with a lot of real estate developers and owners and operators, but more and more we've learned that the data that we're putting into this report and helping to quantify for users is data that they're turning around to present to their investors. So in some ways, the investor does become the client, and it becomes a way of saying, all right, we're not just presenting data to you, we're presenting it to the investor. And what type of data does that need to be? What are the questions that the investors are asking for? What is the data they want to see? And I think that's been a learning process for us of really getting this new kind of clientele base to understand their needs and wants as an audience.
There was another question in the chat that I think might be worth us addressing as well. And I think maybe I should have asked you this at the start. We talk quite a lot in certified metrics, name TBC, about entity. What do we mean exactly with entity?
Yeah, so I think as we've approached this, we have in the Fitwel library an asset by asset certification, but we wanted to create an approach that users could apply to a group of assets. We're calling it an entity right now in the process. Users can self-define the entity, so select which assets fit within the fund. They can dictate whether that is because they're funded in the same way, they're the same type of assets. We've seen it in different ways with different users, defining their entity by all their multifamily residential or all that have the same kind of sustainability mission. We're using that term to kind of encompass the way in which the user is defining their group of assets. And I think that's something that will evolve over time as we better understand the audience base.
Yeah, I think that's been something that I've certainly noticed working with our clients in Europe that have been part of the pilot program. There is a sense that there is a difference between these assets live together in one fund, but actually these assets, some from this fund and some from this fund, actually make more sense together, maybe because they're the same type or they're in the same geography. So we've been flexing that a little bit. And yeah, as you say, Grace, I suspect over time, we're going to have a clearer answer to what we mean on entity. But as we've gone through, it's become quite obvious, I think, from at least the clients that I've been working with, that simply belonging to the same fund doesn't necessarily mean that those assets make sense to be compared against each other and together. So something to look out for as we move into version 2. Speaking of version 2, Grace, what is on the horizon? When we come to the market at some point this year, what do you think are going to be the main differences?
Yeah, so it kind of coincides with a big shift that's happening internally for us at Fitwel. We are launching our Fitwel V3 standard a little bit later this year. And so that version will have a renewed focus on climate change adaptation and mitigation. We know those metrics are a key piece of reporting. And so that will be a key piece of version 2. But also building off of what I said earlier, this really has been an iterative process. So we did our own research. We met with our own clients, these lab members I mentioned. Our partnership with EVORA, we've received feedback from all of you and also your clients, and then also the pilot process. So at each stage, things have been evolving for us. We've been learning as much as I think the users have been learning to make sure that the product meets their needs, but also upholds our standard of research. So I think this new version will also include, this report might not look the same as it does right now. It'll include feedback from the users saying, you know what, maybe if we present the data in this way, this is really how we need it to look for our GRES reporting or for our presentation to investors. And maybe we want some data aggregated in a different way. So I think there's definitely a chance it'll look different, and hopefully only bigger and better as we progress towards the more public launch at the end of the year.
Oh, we're very excited. It's going to be brilliant. There's another question here that I think has appeared a couple of times, so I think maybe I raise it to get that nice and clear. The question's about what differentiates this from other products in the market. I mean, from my side, I think it's pretty clear that the big benefit for completing certified metrics, named TBC, is that benchmarking piece, is the ability to be able to compare apples with apples. And that commercial piece that Grace has explained as well, that being able to add value to the asset as it goes along. But I'd be really interested to hear your perspective on this as well, Grace.
Yeah, I think as we've kind of talked about a little bit, there's a plethora of reporting standards and frameworks on the market today. A lot focus on specific subsets of issues. You know, there's many that focus on carbon emissions, others that kind of focus on niche markets. And especially being a North American-based company where regulators are somewhat behind our counterparts in Europe and the UK, we really wanted to make something that was universally applicable across geographies, and that was a key part of our partnership with EVORA. But also kind of going back to the Fitwel standard, we really build a standard that fits for retrofitting and for new developments. And I think we want to make sure that all types of buildings have the opportunity to have economic value, obviously, but also optimize health. And so we have an option of different scorecards that addresses a variety of different asset types, and also can be used for projects that are in development or existing. And I think that's a key feature because as we've seen, there are challenges sometimes in retrofitting, and an easy way kind of cop out is to say, oh, well, that doesn't fit with the building. But now we're saying, okay, we're providing opportunities for every building to have access to these strategies and these opportunities for improvement.
Yeah, I think there's two things there that are really, really key. That universality piece, it works for buildings in design, it works for operational assets, it works if you're in Denmark or Germany, it works if you're in Japan or the US, it works anywhere, and for any building type. I think that is absolutely key. And I think that's the thing that sets it apart, really. As I said, I think in my piece up at the top, there are lots of standards available on social, and there are lots of standards that talk specifically about social in real estate. I haven't seen any that offer this level of in-depth benchmark alongside a universal approach. And I think I really think that's what's special about what we've got going on here. As we've been talking, Grace, slightly worryingly, many questions appeared. So I'm just scanning through the chat to see if there is anything in particular. Oh, I think this is a technical question and one for you, Grace. Would this be a replacement for a Fitwel certification, or is this an additive to an existing Fitwel certification? If additive, is there a crosswalk? Technical question, I defer to the expert.
Yeah, definitely. So we don't want to compete with ourselves. This is not this is not an alternative to asset certification. I think the asset certification includes these strategies, but also is much more comprehensive in terms of addressing health, but also a lot more time consuming. It involves a much more lengthy documentation process, and that might not be right for every asset in your portfolio. But we want to make health more accessible to all asset types. So I think a benchmarking process with Fitwel helps you to see, and even applying certified metrics to your entire portfolio helps you to see, okay, there may be some assets where I'm checking all of the boxes in certified metrics. Maybe I should apply a full asset certification to this asset because we're already a third of the way there. And we can address health in a lot of different ways. There may be other assets where that doesn't really make sense. And so we see certified metrics as sort of an onboarding process, a way to kind of provide a gap analysis to how you're performing in terms of health, and also to help you assess, make sure you're impacting economic returns in the best way possible for your portfolio. So these are those strategies that we know have the highest impact on value. That's not to say that other strategies within the Fitwel library don't have added economic value, and certainly not health value. So I think it really just depends on the assets in your portfolio and what fits. But to kind of summarize, I would say we see certified metrics as a way to provide an onboarding to full asset certification, and also provide a little bit of a gap analysis in how you're addressing health.
Yeah, I to add to that, I think my experience working with our clients is that it has functioned as a really, really good gap analysis as compared to doing a Fitwel certification. At EVORA, we offer both types of services. We've been doing the pilot and we do full certification. As Grace says, a full certification is a really detailed undertaking. We need photographs, there's a site visit, we come and, we rummage around your policies and we criticize and we update and we make all these changes in order to maximize the health and well-being of the people in that building, which is great. Very often, though, lots of assets would not pass a Fitwel certification. It's a rigorous standard. It is entirely possible to fail a Fitwel certification because the standards are high. What's great about certified metrics, and what has been great for our clients, is that it is a really good way of seeing where the gaps are in your offering. So I keep saying to my clients as we're finishing up our pilot project, no is a good answer. Do you have an indoor air quality policy? No is a good answer. It identifies that you're missing that, and that you're missing the opportunities associated with improved health outcomes and the commercial component to go with it, which hasn't been the case up until now. If you're doing a Fitwel certification or any kind of healthy building certification, you really want the answer to be yes, because you need the points. What we've got with certified metrics is we've kind of flipped that logic on its head. No is a great answer because it exposes where you've got opportunities without the pressure of I'm going to fail. So that is what we've seen on our side. It's really been, it's allowed clients to be more upfront, less afraid of kind of getting in trouble, if you like. And it's been a really useful exercise for the clients that I've been working with.
That's a great point, and one that I don't think I've explicitly said yet, is that we don't have a minimum points threshold for certified metrics. It's really the user will choose which of the 6 targeted outcomes they want to pursue to gauge their performance against them. No is a great answer. Like you said, it helps you get a real understanding of what you're missing, and you won't not get the full report just because you're not responding yes to enough of the strategies. So it really is different from the full asset certification in that way.
Yeah, and really from it's a much less stressful experience for clients because no is fine. Yeah, it's been a completely different experience from doing a Fitwel certification, just to help understand really, where you really are for however you're defining the entity.
Right.
So I've got, I think, one more question in my little bank of questions for you, Grace.
Okay.
And then I don't know if maybe there'll be a couple more questions in the chat. But this is really, and you've mentioned already that you're a North American organization. You've working with EVORA because we're a European organization, although increasingly less so. We are in New York these days. What steps have we taken in order to make this global? I keep banging on about this because the universality, I think, is so important. How have we ensured that this works if you're in Japan or Denmark or anywhere else?
Yeah, I think that was a key piece of what we wanted to make sure we were doing. We are North American based, but do have clients all over the world, and we want to make sure that we're bringing to market something that all of them can use. So that really was assessed in our internal research process of looking at what's being used for ESG benchmarking and standards across the globe, thinking of names we've all heard of, but GRI, TCFD, TNFD, SASB, all these other standards, and saying, what are they asking for? GRESB, and even now new standards in the EU, what are they asking for? And how do we make sure that the data we're providing is applicable to all of those standards? So no matter where you are, and no matter what you're doing, we're providing something that you can turn around and use for your reporting, not only to your own investors, but whichever of those other frameworks you might be using. And we really were intentional about that.
Yeah, and I really think for anybody that is on the investment management side, having a report that works for all of your other reporting requirements, that gives you credits where you need credits, that you're able to use for multiple purposes, is really important. I mean, the reporting burden is only going up. So we really wanted something that works for lots of different things. So that has been a key focus, I think, for both sides of the partnership on this.
Yeah, definitely. And it was actually something that came up in our early feedback stage of this product development was we don't need another thing that we need to report to. I think everyone feels a bit of that reporting fatigue, right? So we wanted to make something that worked for all of those things you already have and all the things you already have to do, not just make one more thing that feels obligatory.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm conscious that there are a couple of questions still in the chat. I'm going to defer to Brian and Rachel, who have been squirreling away in the background, to address those. And really, we're up to, I think, the end of the session. If you are interested in learning more about certified metrics, name TBC, if you're interested in finding out about how this could potentially be a solution when we come to market, at the end of the year, we've got a QR code for you on the screen. I'm going to leave that up for a moment while we're allowing people to get out their devices. Grace, have you got anything you want to leave us with?
No, I mean, each aspect of this, whether it's the research that went behind it, whether it's the kind of content, the report, each one was not developed in haste. I think there's a whole presentation that could go for each part of it. So I encourage anyone who's interested to reach out. I think, like I mentioned, as much as you all want to learn from us, we're learning from you. We're trying to make something that really meets the needs of the market. So we're excited about where this is going. We're excited about making something that will go public at the end of the year or next year. But yeah, so I encourage everyone who's interested to reach out, ask questions, and get involved so we can make this as strong as it can be.
I mean, that's it. I think ultimately, when we kind of boil down to bringing anything new to the real estate market, it has to be collaborative. It's got to be back and forth. It's got to work for your investors, the people in the building. It's got to work for the people that are in the middle of those counterparties. And if we're not getting that kind of feedback, we're not going to end up with something that really fits their needs. So from my side as well, I think if you've got views, if you've got questions, if you want to chat, please do not be afraid to use the QR code to get in contact with us. I'm just going to flip to some more traditional contact opportunities. And what we'll do is we will divide any questions, any feedback we get from this webinar between EVORA and the Centre for Active Design and Fitwel to make sure it goes to the right party. With that, I think we are at a close. Grace, thank you so much for coming and supporting today. It's been a pleasure having you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Excited to have any opportunity to talk about this, and to get your feedback is always great as well. So this was great.
Marvelous. Have a good evening, a good afternoon, good day, wherever you are. Thanks very much.
Thank you.